Kyiv and Washington have reportedly agreed to the terms of a draft minerals and resources deal. The agreement could be signed as early as Friday, with plans for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy to travel to the United States to meet with Donald Trump. The U.S. president has been demanding Ukraine give access to its rare earth minerals in what Trump calls payback for wartime aid provided by the U.S. under Joe Biden.
That I hear that he's coming on Friday. Certainly, it's okay with me if he'd like to, and he would like to sign it together with me. And I understand that's a big deal, very big deal. And I think the American people, even if you look at polling, they're very happy because Biden was throwing money around like it's cotton candy, and it's a very big deal. It could be $1 trillion deal. It could be whatever.
So before the pens are drawn and the deal is done, let's take a look at exactly what we know about these mineral resources that suddenly seem so central to the future of Ukraine.
Fighting near a Ukrainian village on the front lines last year. Tank battles raged above ground that geologists estimate holds hundreds of millions of dollars of lithium. That's just one of the resources that Ukraine has significant deposits of. There are also deposits of graphite, titanium, zirconium, and rare earth metals spread across Ukraine. Some in the areas controlled by Russia, but much in the territory Ukraine itself still controls. Potentially worth more than $10 trillion, making Ukraine potentially a very rich country. The White House sent the Treasury Secretary to Ukraine to sign a deal. An alleged leaked draft said the U.S. would get half the money Ukraine earns from mining, as well as oil and gas resources, ports, and other infrastructure. The deal has been compared to the Treaty of Versailles imposed on Germany after it lost World War I, which forced Germany to pay what would now be hundreds of billions of dollars in reparations. The amount Ukraine would end up paying is far greater in adjusted terms, despite the fact that Russia is the aggressor in the current war. Minerals as compensation for past and possible future aid. Ukraine sees its mineral wealth as its path forward to rebuilding after the war eventually ends. Ukraine can't afford to alienate the U.S. and lose its backing, but fears that without security guarantees against further Russian aggression, it might get nothing in return for signing away its wealth.
Let's bring in DW correspondent Nick Connolly from Kyiv. Nick, what more do we know about what the parties have reportedly agreed to at this point?
Nicole, it is very difficult. There are lots of competing reports, most of them based on briefings, unnamed officials, very few kind of officials coming out with their names and talking about detail. So I think we have to kind of foreground those doubts. But seemingly it has been possible for the Ukrainians to firstly get rid of that $500 billion figure that was kind of floating around. That was what Trump and his team were saying that Ukraine owed the United States. Obviously, Ukraine has always stressed that it received only about ballpark $100 billion in US aid since the beginning of this war, so that was obviously a huge difference there. It also seems that they've basically kicked the kind of details of how America is going to get money from this down the line and say that's going to be kind of something to be agreed in future through future agreements. And basically, all we've kind of heard so far is that 50% of the revenues from new projects in oil, gas, rare earth metals, critical minerals will be put into a fund. And what the Americans get out of those 50%, we don't know yet. I think at this point, it's a face-saving, obviously, effort. The Ukrainians don't want to risk another kind of falling out with the Americans like we had last week when Donald Trump called Zelenskyy a dictator. But equally, they are very clear. We had Zelenskyy saying recently he doesn't want to sign a deal that will take 10 generations for Ukraine to pay back.
Is there a sense that Ukraine got what it wanted?
Until this is signed, until we see the text, I would be a little careful about saying that. There's been so much turbulence about this. We've heard so many extraordinary stories of Zelenskyy supposedly shouting at the US Treasury Secretary who arrived in Kiev 2 weeks ago, expecting him to sign on the dotted line immediately without any option for Ukraine to negotiate. But certainly we have seen that Ukraine has stood its ground and has called out Donald Trump, said, Zelenskyy saying that Trump is surrounded by Russian